On the morning of May 29, 1944, in the heart of the mid-Atlantic, Captain Lieutenant Detlev Krankenhagen guided U-549 to a depth of 600 feet farther down than most Allied depth charges could ever reach. In the still silence, he believed that depth meant absolute safety. Less than 1 hour earlier, his Type 9 C-40 submarine had torpedoed and sunk the American escort carrier Block Island, a triumph that made his crew feel like hunters slipping into darkness, unaware that their roles were about to reverse. Moments after sinking the American escort carrier Block Island, the hunter became the hunted. Beneath the dark weight of the Atlantic, Captain Lieutenant Detlev Krankenhagen listened through the hydrophones to the rhythmic, relentless thrum of American destroyer escorts sweeping above. They had survived such hunts before 3 years of brutal Atlantic warfare had taught them the rule drop to maximum depth. Go silent. It had saved them once, but tonight silence would no longer mean safety. Deep beneath the Atlantic, U-549 waited silent as the darkness around it. Captain Krankenhagen knew every Allied sonar had a blind spot directly below the escort's hull. His order was calm: hold steady, let them pass overhead. In those precious few seconds, the submarine twisted sharply, slipping away from the falling charges. Explosions roared above, gauges cracked, light bulbs shattered, but the pressure hull held firm. At 600 feet, they believed they had survived once more. A mistake they could not know: the rules had changed. In May 1944, deep in the mid-Atlantic, Captain Detlev Krankenhagen believed his submarine lay safely hidden beneath 600 feet of cold water. What he could not know was that the rules of this deadly game had changed. Above him, the destroyer escort USS Eugene E. Elmore maintained perfect sonar contact with U-549 even at depths once thought unreachable. While the German crew felt invisible in the ocean's silence, a new Allied technology had already erased that blindness, marking the moment when every survival tactic they trusted would fail. In the dark Atlantic night of May 19, 44 flashes burst across the foredeck of USS Elmore. Lieutenant Commander G.L. Coney gave the order. 24 projectiles leapt forward in under 2 seconds, arcing into a perfect circle 200 yards ahead of the bow. Each shell, 7 inches wide, 65 pounds in weight, packed 35 pounds of Torpex, 1.5 times the power of TNT. Under nearly perfect conditions, the Type 144 sonar held the submarine's echo steady far below where the German U-549 hid beneath the waves. For a heartbeat, the ocean itself seemed to hold. Its breath, then rings of fire streaked into the night, marking the dawn of a new era in anti-submarine warfare. The Hedgehog projectiles plunged through the Atlantic at 23.5 feet per second, racing towards 600 feet where U-549 hid in the dark. They would reach that depth in about half a minute, a brief heartbeat of tension. Unlike depth charges that detonated at preset depths, these bombs exploded only upon contact. The first salvo missed, sinking silently past the submarine to the ocean floor. Inside the hull, Captain Krankenhagen likely exhaled in relief, believing he had escaped. But above, the American sonar still held steady, readying for another strike, a strike that would rewrite naval warfare. On the night of May 29, 1944, the escort destroyer USS Elmore maintained perfect sonar contact with U-549. 3 minutes to reload, then another 24 Hedgehog rounds launched. 30 seconds after entering the water, 3 underwater blasts echoed through Elmore's sonar, 3 direct hits on the pressure hull. 4 minutes later, operators heard a different sound, a crushing, heavy explosion. The submarine imploded beyond its crushed depth, killing all 55 men instantly. From Elmore's second salvo to the U-boat's destruction, only 4.5 minutes passed. In that brief span, naval warfare shifted forever. The Germans realized every tactic that once saved them now meant nothing against a weapon that killed upon contact. In the spring of 1944, the war quietly crossed a threshold. A new technology emerged, erasing every tactical advantage German U-boat commanders had relied on since the conflict began. The question that haunted the survivors through the final year echoed beneath the waves. How do you survive an attack you cannot hear, cannot evade, and that arrives before you can move? To grasp the psychological weight of that question, 1. must first understand what those men believed that skill, discipline, and experience could bring them home alive. But that belief was shattered in mere seconds as the hedgehog weapon turned the safe interval between explosions into a deadly moment of inevitability. By 1943, German submariners held no illusions about the danger they faced. The Battle of the Atlantic had already claimed thousands of their comrades, yet amid the fear they clung to, one lifeline: hard-won tactical knowledge earned through years of brutal experience. Since 1939, they had refined a doctrine built on a single, fragile advantage: the sonar blind spot, that fleeting moment when sound and silence overlap. Deep beneath the waves, they believed that by mastering the rhythm of the sea, men could still outwit machines. What they didn't know was that above the surface, those rules were already being rewritten. The British, ASDIC, and American sonar systems sent out sound pulses that bounced off submerged targets and returned as echoes. At medium ranges, the technology worked effectively, allowing escort ships to detect and track submarines. But as the distance closed, the physics of underwater acoustics revealed a fatal flaw. The closer the escort approached, the shorter the delay between the outgoing ping and the returning echo, until at less than 200 yards, they merged into one instantaneous echo, and the submarine vanished completely from sonar, just as the attack began. At the exact moment when accurate weapon placement mattered most, the submarine vanished from sonar screens. Beneath the attacking ship lay a blind zone, a pocket of silence where sonar echoes died, giving the hunted a fleeting chance to survive. Inside that hidden void, German U-boat commanders found their advantage. They trained relentlessly to exploit this weakness to disappear, change course, and survive, while their pursuers believed the target was gone for good. A heartbeat between death and disappearance, where only skill and instinct kept men alive. As the escort vessel passed directly overhead to drop its depth charges, the German submarine executed sharp changes in direction and speed. In those critical seconds, the attackers' sonar went temporarily blind. They could only drop their charges based on the submarine's last known position. But in that fleeting moment, the U-boat had already slipped 50 to 100 yards away, turning what seemed like a perfect strike into nothing but a thunderous miss in the dark ocean. That tiny gap between perception and reality, between what was heard and what truly was, marked the razor-thin line between life and death beneath the Atlantic waves. Allied depth charges, once feared as unstoppable killers, ironically gave submarines their greatest advantage. The Mark VI and Mark VII sank at only 8 to 9 feet per second, too slow to strike with surprise. At 300 feet, they took over 30 seconds to reach attack depth, precious time for a skilled U-boat captain to change course, shift depth, and vanish into silence. In those half a minute beneath the Atlantic, patience and precision became stronger armor than steel itself. During that half minute of blindness, while the escort ships lost sonar contact and the depth charges drifted slowly downward, the U-boat captain ordered rapid changes in depth, speed, and heading. The explosives detonated at preset depths regardless of how close they were to the submarine, filling the ocean with massive underwater blasts that temporarily jammed sonar for both attackers and nearby escorts. In that fleeting window, the Germans believed they had found a fragile breath of safety, a narrow escape hidden beneath the thunder of the deep. The deafening underwater blasts didn't just shake the sea, they filled it with turbulence and noise, lasting over 15 minutes, long enough for a German U-boat to slip away, unseen, gliding silently to a new depth and course beyond the hunter's reach. That's why German engineers built their submarines with extraordinary structural strength, designed to endure repeated shockwaves and still survive. For them, steel and silence were the final shields between life and death in the depths of the Atlantic. The pressure hull of the Type 7 CUO submarine, the most common variant, was engineered to endure pressures at depths approaching 750 feet, a limit few captains ever dared to test. Yet its real strength lay not in numbers but in its ability to absorb the violent shock of nearby depth charge blasts without tearing apart. To fatally damage such a vessel, multiple charges had to detonate within 10 to 20 feet of the hull. This made its steel skin a shield beneath the sea, a testament to German engineering and to the crew's faith in their ship until new weapons arrived and proved that even safe depth was just an illusion. Navy records confirmed a staggering truth throughout World War II. Out of 5,174 depth charge attacks, only 85.5 resulted in confirmed U-boat kills, roughly one success in 60 attempts. Many German submarines survived hundreds of depth charge explosions during their service, steel hulls trembling under pressure yet refusing to yield. Those numbers weren't just statistics, they were a testament to the human will to survive, to the belief that discipline, experience, and iron could defy both the sea and the fire above. In April of 1945, the U-427 earned its grim fame in the cold Atlantic depths. For endless hours it endured 678 depth charges raining down from Allied ships, each blast shaking, steel dimming lights, and stealing the air from men's lungs. And yet the submarine survived. From that day, a belief spread among German submariners, almost a faith that discipline could defy destruction, that a calm captain and a trained crew could outlast even the ocean's fury. Depth charges were terrifying, yes, but survivable so long as courage held firm beneath the waves. No U-boat crew ever believed they were invincible. They understood with painful clarity that Allied anti-submarine warfare had advanced far beyond the early war years. By 1943, convoy escorts executed coordinated group attacks, multiple ships sharing sonar surrounding and locking every direction of escape. Each hunt became a wall of sound through which survival was almost impossible. For men who once trusted their skill and discipline, a harsh truth emerged: the ocean was no longer a place to hide. In May of 1943, the war beneath the North Atlantic reached a decisive turning point. Improved sonar systems with greater range and sharper resolution cut down the seconds German submarines once used to vanish undetected. From above, escort carriers spread their protective wings over convoys, erasing the surface mobility on which the Wolfpack tactics had depended. That month, German submariners called it Black May, the moment when the ocean that once sheltered them turned into a graveyard of U-boats. From then on, the sea no longer belonged to the hunters. It belonged to the relentless hum of sonar and the whir of propellers that never slept. In that dark month of May, 1943, within just one single month, Allied forces sank 41 German U-boats' losses that far exceeded the rate at which German shipyards could replace them. Faced with disaster, Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz withdrew his submarines from the North Atlantic convoy routes, a grim admission that the balance of power at sea had shifted. Yet even as the strategic situation crumbled, individual U-boat captains still clung to their faith in skill and instinct. They continued to dive deep to exploit the sonar blind spot and to maneuver in those few desperate seconds when escorts dropped their depth charges. In their minds, understanding the enemy's weapons still meant survival, even though beneath the waves the rules of war had already changed forever. Across the vast Atlantic Ocean where the cold waves rolled like a gray curtain, German U-boat captains still believed that skill could outmatch every hunt. They knew their missions were extraordinarily dangerous, yet that belief, that knowledge, discipline, and calm courage could defy fate was what carried them through each patrol. In the dark silence beneath the sea with the distant thuds of falling depth charges, a submariner understood that survival was not luck alone, but the result of precision and resolve, the quiet conviction that made them sail again even when death waited just beyond the hull. Roughly 28,000 of the 40,000 men who served aboard German U-boats would never return, a casualty rate exceeding 70%. Yet danger and certain death were not the same. Skill still mattered. Experience still mattered, and understanding your enemy's weapons and their limits could mean the difference between life and oblivion beneath the cold Atlantic. It was proof that an ordinary individual could create an extraordinary impact, where courage wasn't only about fighting, but about learning, adapting, and surviving in a war that gave no mercy. A skilled captain who knew his boat and executed the right tactics could bring his crew safely home. Many had done so time and again through the deadly storms of the Atlantic. But when the Hedgehog anti-submarine mortar entered service in 1942, everything those men thought they understood began to fade. At first, results were disappointing. Success rates hovered around 5%, barely higher than old depth charges. No one in the Royal Navy yet realized that this humble weapon would soon rewrite the rules of underwater warfare, turning the silent fear of the deep into a nightmare for every German U-boat crew. In early 1943, Royal Navy captains rarely used the hedgehog weapon so much that the Admiralty issued a directive ordering them to explain why they hadn't fired when engaging submerged contacts. Unlike traditional depth charges, which always produced spectacular plumes of water that made crews believe they had hit the target, Hedgehog was hauntingly silent when it missed. No explosion, no towering spray, only 24 small splashes fading into the vast ocean, leaving crews with doubt and unease. A weapon designed to change the game was at first misjudged by its own silence. Yet soon that very silence would prove its power, as crews learned to trust sonar data more than the noise of grand explosions above the waves. 24 projectiles splashed into the sea, leaving only 24 tiny ripples before sinking silently to the ocean floor. No explosions, no smoke, no trace that an attack had ever occurred. That silence stripped away the illusion of victory sailors once felt with depth charges. Gone were the towering water plumes, the thunderous echoes that convinced men they had struck the enemy. All that remained was a calm sea and quiet doubt whispering, the question was this: silence failure or the dawn of a deadlier age? 24 Hedgehog projectiles plunged into the Atlantic, then vanished, no explosion, no sign of victory. All the crew could see were 24 tiny splashes, and then the sea returned to stillness, as if nothing had happened. That silence did more than fill the ocean, it stripped away the illusion of success that depth-charge thunder once gave. Without the roar of explosions, doubt crept in, had they even hit the enemy at all. Within that quiet, a new era of underwater warfare was taking shape, an age where silence was more terrifying than sound. The spigots were angled so that each Hedgehog projectile fell into a circular pattern about 130 feet wide, landing 200 yards ahead of the ship. This forward-firing design was the true revolution. Unlike depth charges dropped from the stern after passing over the target, giving submarines time to hide in the sonar blind spot, the Hedgehog fired forward while the submarine was still locked on sonar. It allowed crews to maintain continuous sonar contact, guiding every projectile toward a depth where the enemy could not react in time. A simple shift in direction, yet it rewrote the rules of undersea warfare. By firing forward, the Hedgehog eliminated the blind time, the critical window, when submarines could maneuver unseen. Now the captain could maintain continuous sonar contact throughout the entire attack, even adjusting his course if the submarine shifted between launch and impact. Behind this seemingly simple concept lay a masterpiece of precision engineering contact fuses that took years of development, built to survive the violent shock of water entry and detonate only when striking the steel hull of a submarine. A small invention that rewrote the rules of underwater warfare forever. Each projectile had to withstand the violent impact of the sea's surface without detonating prematurely. Once submerged, a tiny propeller began spinning through the water flow, arming the fuse after the projectile had sunk about 50 feet. Upon striking a hard surface, the steel hull of a submarine, the fuse triggered the 35-pound Torpex charge instantly. In that instant, from the ocean's perfect silence came a single thunderous verdict. No warning, no escape, just one touch and total destruction. Torpex, an explosive nearly 50% more powerful than TNT, changed everything. At a sink rate of about 23.5 feet per second, Hedgehog projectiles tore through the ocean like spears of steel, reaching 200 feet in under 9 seconds and striking submarines operating at 300 feet. In just 13 seconds. In that brief instant, U-boat crews had almost no time to react. Every evasive tactic that once saved them from depth charges became useless. The power of Torpex was not only in its blast, it was in its speed, precision, and deadly silence. Compared to the more than 30 seconds required for the Mark VI depth charge to reach the same depth, the Hedgehog cut reaction time to less than half. But most importantly, a single direct hit was usually enough to sink a German submarine. The contact detonation meant no water cushion existed to absorb the blast, and 35 pounds of Torpex exploding directly against the pressure hull tore the vessel apart in an instant. A seemingly small improvement, yet one that changed the balance beneath the sea forever. Even when a projectile struck only the outer casing instead of the pressure hull, the contact blast was almost always fatal. By late 1943 and into 1944, the Allies had solved the early flaws of the Hedgehog system. Better trained crews learned to aim with deadly accuracy, while newly introduced combat information centers aboard escort vessels merged sonar data with fire control systems, delivering precision attacks unheard of before. Most crucially, improved sonar, such as the Type 144 unit on USS Elmore, maintained continuous contact even at extreme depths, where older sonar once went blind. This union of training, information, and technology transformed the Hedgehog from a temperamental device into a deep-sea executioner, marking a turning point in the war against the U-boats. With improved sonar technology, Allied escort ships could maintain contact at closer ranges and greater depths than ever before. Statistics soon revealed the difference. By the end of the war, Hedgehog attacks achieved a success rate of about 20%. One submarine sunk for every 5 attacks. In contrast, traditional depth charges never did better than one success in 80. It was a leap not just in weaponry, but in the way humanity understood and mastered the ocean, where science reshaped the balance of survival. Out of 268 Hedgehog attacks recorded by British forces, 47 resulted in confirmed submarine kills, a success rate far superior to conventional depth charging. This remarkable effectiveness led the United States Navy to adopt the weapon through reverse lend-lease in late 1942. American destroyer escorts, built specifically for anti-submarine warfare, began carrying Hedgehog as standard equipment. Across the waves, it marked the moment when a small British invention reshaped the entire Allied strategy beneath the sea, turning experimental innovation into the new standard of naval warfare. The American destroyer escorts, smaller than fleet destroyers, yet larger than corvettes, proved perfectly suited to the new Hedgehog weapon system. By 1944, these ships were patrolling across both the Atlantic and the Pacific, hunting Japanese submarines through the dark waters. In 11 of the last 16 U-boat sinkings by the USS Navy during World War II, Hedgehog projectiles played the decisive role. A simple weapon, a precise tactic, together, they reshaped the entire balance of undersea warfare. In May of 1944, the destroyer escort USS England sank 6 Japanese submarines in just 12 days using the Hedgehog mortar almost exclusively. It was a record that proved the weapon's devastating effectiveness when handled by a well-trained crew with precise sonar coordination. Yet, for German U-boat commanders, simply knowing such a weapon existed was not the same as understanding what it meant for their survival. In that instant, the gap between technical knowledge and human survival became the thin line between life and death. Fragmented intelligence reports trickled back through the German Navy, describing a new forward-firing anti-submarine weapon, one that detonated the instant it made contact. Yet no commander grasped the full picture: how Hedgehog erased the sonar blind spot, its impossibly fast sinking speed, and the deadly silence of failed attacks that let Allied escorts keep sonar contact unbroken. They knew something new existed, but not that the rules of survival beneath the Atlantic had already changed. By the time the German submarine command truly understood what they were facing, the war had already turned irreversibly against them. The question was no longer whether the Hedgehog would affect U-boat losses, but how many more submariners would die before they learned what Captain Detlev Krankenhagen discovered in his final moments on May 29, 1944. All their hard-won tactical knowledge, every survival rule forged through 4 years of depth-charge battles, meant nothing against a weapon that rewrote every law of undersea warfare. In the cold silence below, the myth of safe depth collapsed, along with the belief that skill alone could stand against innovation. The birth of the Hedgehog, the weapon that transformed anti-submarine warfare, didn't begin in grand naval laboratories, but in a cramped office of the Directorate of Miscellaneous Weapons Development. There, a handful of unconventional engineers, affectionately nicknamed the Weasers and Dodgers, worked without prestige or ceremony, but with imagination and defiance. Their unorthodox thinking gave rise to an invention that German U-boat captains would never fully understand until it was too late. In the spring of 1940, Commander Charles Gudev of the Royal Navy looked at a problem everyone else had missed: The weakness of depth charges was not their power, but their use. He realized that navies were striking where submarines had been, not where they were going. From that insight came a bold idea, a mortar that could fire forward, allowing escort ships to attack while maintaining sonar contact. It was the beginning of an undersea revolution, and a technical challenge so immense that many believed it could never work. Yet as history would prove, from that impossible challenge emerged the hedgehog, a weapon that would rewrite the rules of anti-submarine warfare. Between the two world wars, Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Blacker pursued an odd dream, a mortar without a conventional barrel. In his design, the propelling charge stayed fixed inside the weapon, while a steel rod, the spigot, fitted into the hollow tail of the projectile itself. This principle gave rise to the Blacker Bombard infantry mortar and the PIAT anti-tank weapon, but turning it into a naval system was another story. Transforming a trench-borne idea into a weapon capable of striking beneath the ocean, that was the challenge others had failed to solve, and the one he refused to abandon. An engineer-soldier who dared to reshape the way war was fought beneath the waves. In 1941, aboard HMS Whitehall, the Royal Navy tested the first forward-firing anti-submarine weapon, the Fairley mortar. But it failed completely. Its iron nose reduced the explosive payload to only 20 pounds. The fuse placed at the tail made it inaccurate. The range was short, and the blast too weak to pierce a German U-boat's pressure hull, even on a direct hit. Everything went wrong: design, power, and purpose. Yet, within that failure, Goodeve's team recognized the beginning of progress. They resolved to redesign everything from the ground up. They packed 35 pounds of Torpex into every projectile, a charge half again as powerful as TNT, and mounted the contact fuse at the nose, not the tail. The tubular tail provided perfect stability in flight and descent. Critical experiments revealed that flat-nosed projectiles were far less likely to skip or ricochet when striking the water at high velocity, ensuring they sank straight down into the target zone instead of scattering unpredictably. As for the contact fuse mechanism, it demanded extraordinary precision engineering, where even the smallest error could mean complete failure. As each hedgehog projectile plunged at terminal velocity, its body had to endure the violent impact of water without detonating prematurely. At its nose, a small propeller began to spin in the current, whispering through the deep. After descending about 50 feet, the water flow made the propeller turn enough to arm the fuse, silent, exact, and deadly. The brilliance lay in its restraint. The weapon woke up only when it had to, transforming a simple steel cylinder into a masterpiece of precision engineering and lethal timing. When the hedgehog projectile struck a surface harder than the ocean floor, a mechanical trigger instantly fired the detonator. But determining the ideal explosive weight led the engineers into a realm halfway between science and espionage. German U-boat construction data was top secret. Yet Charles Goodeve's team uncovered an Italian naval magazine showing factory workers on a German submarine hull. From a single photograph, they measured the man's proportions, calculated the perspective, and derived the distance between the pressure hull and the outer casing. From that stolen data came the formula for the perfect charge, powerful enough to pierce the hull and destroy a submarine with one direct contact. One photo, a few calculations, and human ingenuity — that's how a modest invention rewrote the war beneath the waves. A faded wartime photograph showed a German worker standing atop a U-boat's pressure hull, performing maintenance on its outer casing deck. No one imagined that this ordinary image would become the technical key to changing the course of submarine warfare. British engineers measured the worker's leg length in the photo, and using perspective calculations, estimated the vertical distance between the pressure hull and the outer casing. From a seemingly useless picture, they extracted the vital number, the exact gap the hedgehog charge had to penetrate to destroy a real U-boat. That discovery led to the 35-pound Torpex warhead calibration, powerful enough to rip through German steel with deadly precision. In that moment, a simple photograph became a weapon, and human ingenuity outsmarted military secrecy. Inside a small Royal Navy workshop, engineers didn't rely on blueprints or theory alone. They built a roulette-like wheel, placing a tiny submarine model at different positions. For days, they fired thousands of miniature projectiles, recording every impact, every angle, every spread pattern. They weren't just testing physics, they were calculating survival itself. Each impact became a formula for life or death beneath the sea. From that spinning wheel, they discovered the perfect attack circle, 130 feet wide, capable of trapping a submarine even as it twisted to evade. A simple experiment that changed the war proof that victory sometimes belongs not to bigger bombs, but to those who dare to rethink the obvious. After hundreds of failed trials, they finally found the perfect pattern, a circle 130 feet wide, with each projectile spaced about 18 feet apart, the statistical optimum to catch a submarine even if it maneuvered. During those brief seconds between launch and water impact, the prototype launcher was fitted aboard HMS Westcott in 1941 for sea trials. Those who built the Hedgehog weren't merely testing a new weapon, they were opening an entirely new chapter in undersea warfare. During testing, the weapon performed reliably, yet in real combat, it failed to meet expectations. From its installation aboard 100 ships until November of 1942, not a single submarine was sunk. The harsh North Atlantic seas drenched the launcher in saltwater spray, leading to electrical misfires that crippled the firing circuits. Many salvos were incomplete, with some projectiles never leaving their tubes, and confidence in this new weapon began to crumble beneath the cold waves. A device once hailed as a breakthrough innovation now risked fading into obscurity, undone not by the enemy but by seawater and fragile wires. The sea roared in fury waves, rising like steel walls against the ship's bow. Keeping the launcher steady in such chaos was nearly impossible. Yet the real struggle was psychological, not mechanical. Depth charge attacks always produced massive explosions, towering geysers bursting from the ocean's surface, giving crews a false sense of victory even when nothing was hit. It was the illusion of power, the thunderous comfort that Hedgehog would soon replace with deadly silence. On the deck, every depth charge explosion once meant victory, towering geysers, thunderous blasts, and the comforting illusion that the enemy had been hit. It gave crews a sense of purpose, commanders a surge of confidence. But with the Hedgehog, when a salvo missed, there was no roar, no column of spray, only 24 tiny splashes followed by silence. The ocean swallowed every trace of effort, leaving the crew adrift in futility. It was a new kind of warfare, a victory without sound, where true effectiveness was measured not by noise but by the discipline to believe in silence. In early 1943, faced with Hedgehog's disappointing results, the Royal Navy refused to quit. An officer from the Directorate of Miscellaneous Weapons Development traveled from London to Londonderry, where most Atlantic escort ships were based. He began a comprehensive retraining program, visiting each vessel one by one, explaining not only the weapon's technical principles, but also real combat examples, showing how deadly Hedgehog could be when properly used. Through that effort, the characteristically British determination transformed a doubted weapon into one that reshaped the battle for the Atlantic. The training emphasized the crucial points crews had long misunderstood. First, the silence of a missed attack was not a flaw, it was a tactical advantage. Depth charges with their thunderous explosions created chaos and noise that blinded sonar for 15 minutes or longer, forcing escorts to reacquire the target from scratch. But with the Hedgehog, that silence meant continuous sonar contact, allowing the hunters to track their prey without losing position. In that stillness, what once felt like failure, sailors discovered that victory could come through patience, precision, and the power of silence. The silence of the Hedgehog was its deadliest weapon. With no explosions to disrupt, sonar escort ships could maintain continuous tracking through multiple attack runs, dramatically raising the odds of a hit. Each salvo formed a perfect circular pattern, calculated to anticipate submarine evasions during the brief descent of the projectiles. When German crews believed they had escaped, those charges were already falling exactly where they were heading. No sound, no warning, only death arriving in silence. Crews were trained to aim at where the submarine truly was at the moment of firing, not to predict where it might go. Every explosion signified a direct hit, almost always a kill, unlike depth charges that could detonate nearby and still fail to destroy their target. This marked a turning point in anti-submarine warfare, coinciding with a wave of late 1943. Allied innovations, sharper sonar, faster combat coordination, and sailors taught to fire by calculation, not instinct. Within months, the hedgehog was no longer an experiment. It became the eyes and claws of the ocean, rewriting the rules beneath the Atlantic. The introduction of combat information centers completely transformed how escort vessels processed tactical data and made attack decisions. Previously, the captain commanded from the bridge, while sonar operators worked in a separate compartment, shouting out bearings and ranges. The captain had to mentally integrate every number with the ship's heading and speed sketching the attack geometry in his mind. Now with the Combat Information Center, all tactical data converged in one unified room, allowing faster, more accurate responses, turning cold data into deadly precision beneath the waves. Inside the Combat Information Center, every strand of tactical data converged into a single hub. Sonar echoes glowed on screens overlaid with the ship's own course and bearing. Radar contacts merged seamlessly with sonar returns, forming a complete tactical picture, unlike anything before a living map of battle, where every pulse of light could mean life or death. Through this system, commanders could track, anticipate, and strike with precision, especially when firing the Hedgehog anti-submarine mortar, a weapon that redefined how warfare beneath the ocean was fought. The new fire control system was now directly integrated with sonar tracking, calculating every firing solution with precision, depth, speed heading of the submarine, and the attacker's course and projectile trajectory. Each shot was no longer guesswork, but the result of mathematics and flawless synchronization. German U-boat commanders began facing this invisible weapon, a seamless alliance between human logic and machine intelligence, without understanding what had changed. The tactics that once kept them alive now failed them completely. In the cold silence of the deep, they realized their enemy's mind had evolved beyond what they could perceive. In May of 1945, during the final weeks of the European War, Captain Helmut Sommer commanded U-853 on patrol off the American East Coast. 1 year earlier, in May of 1944, his submarine had been attacked near the surface by British aircraft, but Sommer survived and brought his boat safely home. His second patrol would prove that the entire tactical equation of undersea warfare had completely changed. On May 5, 1945, Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz issued his final order. All U-boats are to cease offensive operations. Germany's surrender is imminent. The world seemed to exhale, believing the war beneath the sea had ended. But off the cold waves of Point Judith, Rhode Island, one submarine still moved in silence. Captain Helmut Sommer may never have received the message, or perhaps he simply ignored it. On May 6th, his submarine launched a torpedo that sank the American freighter SS Black Point, the final U-boat attack in American waters. As the empire collapsed, Sommer followed only a soldier's instinct to fight until the end in a war that had already ended without him knowing. The last merchant vessel sunk by a German U-boat in American waters triggered an immediate and overwhelming response. Within minutes, destroyer escorts, USS Atherton and USS Moberly, joined by several other vessels, converged on the attack site. Under Lieutenant Commander Louis Eiseland's command, Atherton made the first sonar contact with the hidden submarine around 8:30 that evening, marking the beginning of one of World War II's final U-boat hunts in American farthest waters. The hunt stretched through the night and into the early hours of May 7, 1945. Yet the outcome was almost certain once the American destroyer escorts gained sonar contact. Around 8:30 that evening, USS Atherton released 13 magnetic depth charges into the shallow waters off Rhode Island. One explosion echoed through the darkness, but no one aboard could tell had they struck U-853 or merely one of the many shipwrecks resting on the seafloor. In that heavy black water, the blasts were more than sound, they were the tightening pulse of a hunt drawing to its end, the final act of the Atlantic War beneath the waves. In the stifling darkness of May 6, 1945, Captain Helmut Sommer, who had succeeded his former commander after the previous attack, guided U-853 through turbulent waters. After hours of evasion, the submarine was detected again at 11:43 that night, about 4,000 yards east of its previous position. The vessel lay dead in the water at a depth of 100 feet, propellers silent and motionless. Inside, the temperature climbed in the hot, fetid air, each drop of sweat marking the quiet terror of men waiting in the dark. A sealed world a few hundred feet beneath the sea where silence was the last shield before the storm of steel arrived. Light bulbs shattered under the pressure of near-miss depth charges. Gauge faces cracked, and small leaks began to seep through the metal seams, strained by endless shock. Inside the submarine, silence ruled every man, knowing that even a single sound could betray them to the hunters above. They had survived such attacks before. And Sommer, the seasoned captain, still trusted the old doctrine: stay silent, stay steady, wait for the moment. But he didn't know the rules had changed, and every skill that once kept them alive was about to become worthless in the black water below. In the still darkness of May 7, 1945, beneath the cold Atlantic off Rhode Island, Captain Sommer and his crew aboard U-853 remained in perfect silence. They followed doctrine to the letter. Wait for the escorts to lose contact in the blind spot, then maneuver during those precious seconds as depth charges descend. But this time the ocean gave them no mercy. The escorts never lost contact. Around 2 in the morning, USS Moberly began a hedgehog attack run. 24 projectiles plunged into the water in their distinct circular pattern. No warning, no time to react, only the faint hiss of bubbles rising before the crushing silence that precedes destruction. 3 hedgehog projectiles plunged into the depths and struck U-853's pressure hull directly. 35 pounds of Torpex detonated on contact, erupting beneath the Atlantic like 3 invisible bolts of lightning. In that instant, the ocean's silence shattered, and the crew's fate hung between seconds and eternity. What happened next depended entirely on where those 3 impacts landed. If they pierced the pressure hull, death would come instantly. But if they only ruptured the outer casing, the men would face their final minutes, stretched into a living nightmare. If the projectiles pierced the pressure hull cleanly, the crew died instantly. Seawater under enormous pressure burst into the submarine's compartments with the force of an explosion. Air compressed violently, raising temperatures high enough to ignite anything combustible. There was no warning, no chance to react, only one suffocating sound and eternal darkness swallowing the boat. It wasn't just a physical death, but the collapse of faith itself, as even the most seasoned sailors realized that going deeper no longer meant being safe. Death came in less than a single second for the men near the impact points, and only slightly longer for those in the other compartments, as the ocean consumed the entire vessel. But if the shells struck only the outer casing and ruptured ballast tanks without breaching the pressure hull, Captain Sommer and his crew faced a different horror. They knew instantly their submarine was mortally wounded. The metal groaned, pressure climbed, and darkness pressed in from every side. In those moments, they realized the ocean wasn't killing them instantly, it was making them feel every passing second. The submarine began to sink, tilting nose or stern first, depending on which ballast tanks flooded. The crew was powerless to stop the descent. At a depth of only 100 feet, when the attack struck, they had less than 4 minutes before reaching their crush depth somewhere beyond 700 feet. Those 4 minutes were 4 minutes of knowing death was coming. As the hull groaned, the tilt steepened, and the ocean's pressure closed in like an iron fist. There was no way to stop it, only silence and the cold truth of the deep. 4 minutes an eternity beneath the crushing black of the Atlantic. The pressure hull groaned as the steel strained tiny leaks, turning into jets of water under impossible force. The submarine tilted steeper, plunging helplessly into darkness as every gauge crossed the limit of survival. Then came the final moment, a heavy crunching detonation, the entire structure collapsing inward within a fraction of a second under millions of pounds of pressure. All sound vanished, leaving behind only silence, the silence of men who challenged the deep and never returned. No one aboard U-853 survived. All 55 men perished. Yet their deaths were not an isolated tragedy, they marked a deadly pattern emerging through 1944 and continuing into 1945. Operation Teardrop, launched in April and May of 1945, showcased the full integration of Allied sonar hedgehog mortars and anti-submarine warfare tactics. Across the cold Atlantic nights, German submarines were hunted and destroyed, swiftly, precisely, without escape. From those silent explosions beneath the waves, the undersea war entered a new era where courage and experience alone could no longer guarantee survival. In April of 1945, Allied intelligence sent a chilling warning. Nazi Germany had dispatched a group of Type 9 submarines, codenamed Group Seawolf, toward the American East Coast. Rumors claimed they carried advanced weapons or V-bombs, a threat capable of striking the U.S. mainland. In response, the United States Navy mobilized 2 massive barrier forces stretching across the mid-Atlantic, with one single mission: to locate and destroy every U-boat before it reached American waters. It was more than a military operation. It became a race of technology, tactics, and human resolve across the endless sea. In the vast mid-Atlantic during the spring of 1945, the U.S. Navy erected 2 massive walls of steel across the ocean. The first barrier force deployed 20 destroyer escorts, split into northern and southern groups, each backed by 1 escort carrier. The second force stood just as formidable: 2 escort carriers and 22 destroyer escorts, forming patrol lines that spanned the entire ocean. Every position was drawn from decrypted German naval communications, where every radio pulse betrayed the hidden paths of U-boats before they could strike. It was a silent hunt of intelligence over firepower, a game of strategy and code where the Atlantic itself became a chessboard, and every German submarine was already cornered. The Germans remained unaware that their Enigma codes had been completely broken. They continued sending detailed operational orders, messages that Allied codebreakers read almost as fast as the Germans themselves. And then U-235 became the first casualty. Just before midnight on April 15th, USS Stanton detected the submarine on radar as it tried to slip through the barrier on the surface. From that moment, Germany's unbreakable secret was shattered, and the hunt in the dark began. On the night of April 16, 1944, beneath the icy waters of the Atlantic Ocean, the destroyer escort USS Stanton launched its Hedgehog salvo, 24 deadly bombs arcing through the dark like falling stars. The German submarine dove deep, believing it had escaped, but together with USS Frost, Stanton maintained relentless sonar contact for hours. The third attack struck at midnight, found its mark: a thunderous impact, and 56 men vanished with their submarine. A brief, violent moment that proved how persistence and innovation could turn the tide beneath the waves. 40 minutes later, and barely 1.5 nautical miles from U-235's last position, the radar aboard USS Frost caught a new contact: U-880. The submarine had boldly closed in on the American destroyer escorts, while they were still prosecuting the previous target. When the searchlight sliced across the waves, its metallic hull flickered into view, then vanished, as small-caliber fire struck the conning tower. Within seconds, U-880 slipped beneath the surface, swallowed by the silent darkness of the Atlantic. In the black expanse of the Atlantic night, Frost, Stanton, and USS Hughes locked their sonar on U-880 without pause. Multiple Hedgehog attacks followed, ripping through the waves until around 4 in the morning, Stanton delivered the fatal blow. None of the 52 crewmen survived. Both submarines erupted in explosions far greater than what 35 pounds of Torpex should have produced. Those blasts did more than destroy steel. They shattered the last illusion of safety beneath the sea, marking the moment when Germany's old doctrines finally died in silence beneath the waves. The massive secondary explosions sparked fears among American commanders that German submarines were carrying rockets or other secret weapons, a terrifying possibility that could threaten the U.S. mainland. Driven by that fear, they intensified their efforts to destroy every remaining U-boat before it could approach closer. Later, intelligence confirmed that neither submarine carried any advanced weaponry. Those tremendous detonations had been caused by Hedgehog projectiles, striking and triggering the submarine's own torpedo warheads or compressed air flasks, a stark reminder of the weapon's devastating power. Just before midnight on April 22, 1944, the destroyer escorts USS Scott and USS Carter launched a coordinated Hedgehog attack, a storm of silent projectiles descending through the dark Atlantic. Within seconds, U-518 vanished from sonar. 55 sailors, none survived. 2 days later, on April 24th, USS Flaherty hunted U-546 for nearly 10 hours without pause. When the final hedgehog salvo struck, the submarine broke the surface, torn metal smoke rising before sliding back beneath the waves under deck gunfire from 4 escort ships. The ocean closed like a steel door, sealing away another generation of German submariners. For them, the sea was no longer a refuge. It had become the grave of old beliefs, where the doctrine of dive deep and stay silent meant nothing against a weapon that could find you even in perfect silence. After 10 relentless hours of pursuit across the Atlantic, the German submarine was struck by hedgehog rounds and forced to surface. Captain Lont Paul Just and 32 crewmen survived, taken prisoner by American forces. Inside a tense interrogation room, intelligence officers demanded answers. Were you carrying weapons meant for attacks on American cities? No longer hunters beneath the waves they had become, living witnesses to a war reaching its end. Men whose courage was tested not only by explosions, but by the doubt and fear that follow victory. A brief moment on the ocean, yet it reflected the fate of thousands of U-boat sailors, survivors, not because they won, but because the war finally stopped. The results were unmistakable. German U-boats that once survived or escaped depth-charge attacks were now destroyed within minutes, once hedgehog-equipped escorts locked onto them with sonar. This weapon eliminated the sonar blind spot, the very foundation of German submarine tactics for years. In moments, every rule of survival beneath the sea that U-boat captains had trusted collapsed completely. What was once safety had become a deadly trap. The Hedgehog's rapid descent left German U-boat commanders with no time to execute the evasive maneuvers that had once saved them from depth charges. Its contact fuses meant every explosion was a hit, and every hit was almost always fatal. Those few who survived and made it back to port filed reports that grew darker each time, describing how every tactic once trusted for survival had turned into a silent death sentence beneath the waves. The once reliable evasion tactics, diving deep, staying silent, and making sharp turns as escorts passed overhead, no longer guaranteed survival. Some Allied escorts could now maintain sonar contact even at depths once thought safe. Worse, still attacks came not from above but from ahead, striking before a submarine could even maneuver. What was once the art of survival for U-boat captains had become an outdated rhythm in a battle that had changed forever. The explosions, when they came, no longer echoed from afar. This time the blasts struck directly against the hull, tearing through steel, and not merely rippling through water as shockwaves, but delivering fatal blows to the heart of the submarine. Beneath the cold Atlantic, every German captain's faith in safe depth collapsed. German naval intelligence tried desperately to piece together the scattered fragments of reports about this new weapon, one that made every old survival tactic obsolete. Yet all they found were broken fragments of truth, as the Hedgehog had already rewritten the rules of undersea warfare. The Germans understood that a forward-firing anti-submarine weapon existed, one that detonated only upon contact. But they never grasped the full tactical picture: how it worked hand in hand with improved sonar, how its forward launch erased the blind window, and how its incredible sinking speed compressed reaction time to just a few fatal seconds. That complete understanding came too late, far too slow to reshape German tactics or training in any meaningful way. By the time they realized it, the ocean's rules had already changed. By the time German naval analysts finally understood what the Hedgehog truly meant, their submarine force had already been shattered beyond recovery. The cold statistics told a story of transformation in anti-submarine warfare. The German commanders could read but never counter. Throughout World War II, British forces launched 5,174 depth-charge attacks, yet only 85 resulted in confirmed kills. The Hedgehog, a weapon that seemed simple, changed the odds, forever turning the hunt for submarines from a gamble into a near-certain sentence. It wasn't just a victory of technology. It was the moment when old beliefs were crushed beneath the weight of new truth. During World War II, Allied depth charges achieved only 1 confirmed kill for every 60 attacks. Then came the Hedgehog, and everything beneath the waves changed. With just 268 attack runs, it destroyed 47 German submarines, 1 kill for every 5 strikes, a 20-fold leap in effectiveness. By the final year of the war, the Hedgehog had become more than a weapon. It was proof that innovation, not firepower, decides the outcome of battle. By 1944, American forces had fully mastered the use of the Hedgehog weapon. In 11 of the last 16 U-boat sinkings, U.S. Navy destroyers and destroyer escorts relied on this compact yet devastating anti-submarine mortar. And it wasn't just in the Atlantic. The Hedgehog proved equally lethal across the Pacific, where USS England achieved an unmatched feat, destroying 6 Japanese submarines in 12 days. From that moment, the Hedgehog was more than a weapon. It was a symbol of how innovation, discipline, and courage converged to rewrite the rules of underwater warfare. In just 12 short days, from RO-105 to RO-107, 6 Japanese submarines were destroyed. An unmatched record proving what a well-trained crew with precise sonar integration could achieve. The awkward device, with the strange name conceived by Commander Charles Goodhue, had now evolved into the most lethal anti-submarine weapon of the entire war. But for German U-boat crews, this triumph was not a statistic or a tactic. It was devastation, made personal, a death sentence echoing through the deep where they once believed they were safe. Amid the cold arithmetic of war lies a truth that silences even historians of roughly 40,000 men who served aboard German submarines. More than 28,000 never returned, a loss rate exceeding 70%. No branch of any military in any nation suffered casualties so devastating. Each dive beneath the surface was not just a maneuver, it was a farewell. They fought not only the enemy but the crushing depths, the darkness, and the near certainty of death. A tragic price for loyalty and duty paid in silence beneath a sea where sunlight could never reach. In the final 18 months of the war, the arrival of the Hedgehog and other advanced anti-submarine technologies contributed heavily to the carnage beneath the Atlantic waves. Yet beyond the physical destruction lay a deeper wound, the collapse of belief. German U-boat doctrine had long insisted that skill and tactical mastery could offset the Allies' superior numbers and technology. But as the rules of survival changed, those same tactics became a fatal illusion. Facing a weapon that struck from a range they couldn't hear or evade, the crews learned that courage alone was no longer enough. Sometimes the deadliest moment in war is not the explosion itself, it's the instant you realize everything you believed has stopped being true. Experienced commanders, men who knew every sound and shiver of their boats beneath the dark Atlantic, understood when to vanish and when to move. Because of that, many survived to complete their missions. That belief system, though it never guaranteed survival, gave them the mental framework to endure the unbearable, a fragile hope that turned fear into focus and chaos into stardom. Discipline. It was the invisible armor of those who fought in silence, where a single wrong decision could cost the lives of every man aboard. German submariners once convinced themselves that their fate still rested partly in their own hands, that skill and courage could make the difference. But the Hedgehog shattered that belief completely. It struck from ahead while the submarine remained under constant sonar observation, erasing the only blind spot their evasive tactics relied upon. Everything that once gave them hope, skill, experience, bravery, became nothing more than an illusion in the face of new technology. The Hedgehog projectiles reached their targets in mere seconds, far faster than the half-minute descent of traditional depth charges. That speed erased every human chance to react. Before the crew even realized what had happened, the contact detonation had already turned the submarine into a steel tomb beneath the sea. In the ocean's silence, there was no more evasion, only a heartbeat between life and nothingness. The surviving U-boat captains of the war's final year spoke of a quiet but devastating transformation. The grim discipline and iron courage that once defined them had given way to a cold acceptance of fate. After witnessing so many comrades vanish beneath the sea after facing weapons that struck without warning or mercy, they knew every patrol now meant sailing towards certain death. There was no longer hope of one more lucky escape. In the dim red light of the pressure hull, these men understood that they were no longer fighting for victory, but marching toward destiny. The numbers left no room for illusion, they sealed every fate. New submarines embarking on their first patrols faced survival chances in single-digit percentages, and even the veteran boats with experienced crews fared little better. As Allied anti-submarine warfare kept improving, while Germany's resources and training standards decayed, the odds of returning home shrank to almost nothing. In the cold darkness of the Atlantic, each statistic became a sentence, and every patrol a gamble against destiny. In his haunting memoir, Iron Coffins, Herbert Werner, who commanded several German U-boats and survived the war, described the suffocating atmosphere beneath the waves. He wrote of men going to sea knowing they would likely never return, of silent meals before departure, where submariners avoided mentioning the future, because even speaking of it felt like inviting fate. It was a world where fear became a companion, and silence was the last act of courage left to them. Deep beneath the ocean, Herbert Werner described the sound of depth charges echoing the waiting, the darkness, the water dripping from strained steel joints as men counted the seconds between blasts, trying to guess whether death was moving closer or drifting away. But he also wrote that the attacks which came without warning, no sound of propellers, no rising chorus of sonar pings, were the ones that truly broke the crew's nerves. There was no time to brace, no time to hope. Only silence, then annihilation. It was the fragile space between false calm and real catastrophe, where men learned that in the deep sea, silence itself could mean death. The submarine moved silently in the deep, her crew surrounded by cold darkness, when suddenly the steel hull rang out like a death knell. Projectiles struck directly, followed instantly by a violent detonation that tore everything apart. There was no time to brace, no chance to evade. Death came in a single heartbeat, ending someone's war before they even realized it. In the deep ocean, the final silence settled, a silence where technology had made courage and experience meaningless. There was no gradual buildup of tension anymore, no illusion that the crews still played a part in their own survival. Death came suddenly, brutally, and without warning. For the few who survived damaged boats, the haunting truth remained: next time they might not be so lucky. By the final months of the war, the once feared German submarine force had ceased to exist as a strategic threat, its legacy fading beneath the waves of the Atlantic. In the final weeks of the war, Grand Admiral Karl Donitz continued sending German submarines on patrol, partly because withdrawal would have freed Allied naval forces for other operations, partly from the inertia of a war machine too vast to halt, and partly from a desperate last hope that new submarine designs equipped with snorkel-breathing systems might restore tactical balance. But they did not. By the war's end, Germany's submarine pens in France stood destroyed or captured, and all that remained were rusting hulls and dreams that sank with them beneath the Atlantic. As the war drew to a close, Germany's remaining U-boats lay scattered across Norwegian fjords and Baltic ports, their crews mostly untrained replacements for the veterans lost over 4 brutal years of attrition. Yet the story of the Hedgehog weapon system extends far beyond its tactical triumphs. From a simple, forward-firing mortar, it reshaped the balance of the Atlantic, turning quiet innovation into a weapon that ended an era. Hedgehog proved that in war, as in life, progress often comes not from louder firepower, but from a smarter idea, a reminder that sometimes a single invention can change the fate of thousands beneath the waves. The Hedgehog was not a guided weapon nor an electronic marvel. It was a simple mechanical device, a spigot mortar adapted for naval use, firing unguided projectiles that sank through water and detonated on contact. Yet from that simplicity came power. When properly integrated with tactical doctrine and thorough training, the Hedgehog accomplished what far more complex weapons could not. It rewrote the rules of naval combat. It stands as proof that in war, even a small improvement applied with understanding and precision can transform the battlefield. That seemingly simple concept, when paired with improved sonar systems and smarter tactical training, achieved effectiveness far beyond more sophisticated weapon systems. The Hedgehog's development became a testament to persistence in the face of failure. Early deployments were disappointing, almost enough to abandon the project, yet the Royal Navy's engineers and crews chose to refine, not retreat, testing, recalibrating, learning, until a simple weapon turned into the nightmare of every German U-boat commander. It was proof that enduring persistence can outmatch the most complex invention. Hedgehog's early success rates barely surpassed those of depth charges, just enough to sow doubt. Crews distrusted the system, technical failures haunted every mission. A less determined Navy might have declared the weapon a dead end, and returned to familiar methods, abandoning innovation when it mattered most. Yet the Royal Navy's persistence, its refusal to give up in the face of failure, became the turning point that reshaped the war beneath the waves. Instead of abandoning the project, British naval leadership analyzed the failures systematically, realizing that most problems came not from design flaws but from poor training and weak integration with sonar systems. They invested heavily in comprehensive crew education programs, transforming confusion into competence and turning Hedgehog into a weapon that changed the war. Across the Atlantic, the United States adopted Hedgehog through reverse lend-lease, showcasing an alliance built on shared knowledge, trust, and innovation, a partnership that reshaped the course of naval warfare. Britain, having invested immense resources to develop the Hedgehog weapon, freely shared its entire design with the United States. The Americans didn't merely copy it, they refined it, creating the mousetrap variant for smaller patrol craft that couldn't mount full Hedgehog launchers. This collaboration embodied the spirit of true alliance, each nation contributing its own strengths to solve shared defense challenges. It stood in sharp contrast to German and Japanese practices, where inter-service rivalry and institutional jealousy often crippled cooperation before it even began. In that war, it wasn't just technology that triumphed, it was the power of trust and collaboration that reshaped the oceans. The legacy of the Hedgehog didn't end with World War II. From crude launchers on escort decks came a new principle: strike while still in contact. That idea became the foundation of modern anti-submarine warfare. Successors like Britain's Squid and Limbo mortars and the U.S. Mark 46 homing torpedo all followed the same doctrine: maintain contact, attack, precisely deny the enemy a chance to hide. From a simple mechanical device, Hedgehog reshaped how humans fought beneath the waves, turning blind reaction into controlled precision. Maintain contact while the target remains under observation. Eliminate the blind time that once allowed German submarines to escape. After the war, German naval theorists reflected and realized that Hedgehog was more than a weapon. It was part of a complete Allied response, where technology, tactics, and doctrine fused into a system Germany simply could not counter. While they still trusted old strategies, the world around them had changed, and the technological war had already left them behind. The Hedgehog alone did not defeat the U-boat menace. It was one piece of a larger Allied masterpiece: improved surface radar, high-frequency radio direction finders, intercepting submarine signals, escort carriers, shielding convoys from the air, and ever-advancing sonar systems mapping the deep. Above all, the complete breaking of Germany's naval Enigma code allowed the Allies to predict, locate, and ambush each submarine before it struck. It was a victory of integration, where technology, intelligence, and tactics merged into an unbreakable anti-submarine web, proof that in modern warfare, no invention wins alone. Grand Admiral Karl Donitz, who once commanded Germany's entire U-boat fleet and briefly succeeded Hitler during the war's final days, spent years after the war searching for answers why his submarines, once the terror of the Atlantic, had failed to achieve the strategic victories he believed possible. In the end, he pinpointed the decisive cause: Allied code-breaking of the Enigma system, which had turned every German plan into an open book. German submarines were sailing straight into traps because every operational order they sent was being read by the enemy. The Allies not only knew where they were headed, but intercepted them in the heart of the Atlantic, once a sanctuary beyond land-based aircraft. When escort carriers entered the scene, that deadly mid-ocean gap closed forever. Combined with improved sonar and advanced anti-submarine weapons, every U-boat patrol became a fatal gamble, where technology and intelligence erased the very tactics that once promised survival. Grand Admiral Karl Donitz, the proud architect of Germany's U-boat fleet, never fully accepted that the balance had shifted irreversibly. He kept believing that different tactics, better training, or improved submarine designs might have changed the outcome. Yet by the time Allied industry, technology, and tactical innovation reached full effectiveness, that belief had become a shadow of the past. The hard truth was this: it wasn't weakness that doomed them, it was the failure to adapt. In the final years of the war, many German commanders clearly saw the overwhelming technological and material advantages of the Allies, yet they refused to believe that the cumulative effect of those strengths, combined with Germany's collapsing strategic position and dwindling resources, had made defeat inevitable. That refusal was more than a strategic mistake. It was a human tragedy paid for with the lives of tens of thousands who died because their leaders could not face reality. In the final weeks of the war, U-boat crews kept sailing out even when all strategic purpose had long since vanished. Submarines that could have stayed safely in port, preserving their crews' lives for Germany's eventual rebuilding, instead departed into futility. They were no longer fighting for victory, only fulfilling orders that meant nothing but more names on the casualty list. A generation sailing into darkness when faith was gone, but duty remained. The courage and devotion of these men deserve respect. Yet their sacrifice was in vain, wasted by leaders who could not face the evidence staring back at them. Now return to that morning of May 29, 1944, when U-549 slipped beneath the North Atlantic, taking with it every soul aboard, and with them the belief that loyalty alone could change fate. But war never spares those who only believe. It reminds us that truth can be more brutal than bravery. Captain Lieutenant Detlev Krankenhagen commanded a modern submarine crewed by well-trained sailors. He understood every anti-submarine warfare tactic the German Navy had refined through 4 years of brutal experience. Each order he gave: dive deep, go silent, wait for the blind spot maneuver, as the escort passed overhead, was flawless, perfectly aligned with everything doctrine and survival had taught. But what he could not know was that those very rules had become obsolete the moment he followed them. At the depth, he believed safe. Every lesson, every instinct, every ounce of discipline turned into the silent path that led him and his men to their fate. Everything Krankenhagen did was correct, yet it was not enough. The tactical world around him had changed in ways German commanders understood only imperfectly or not at all. The escort still maintained sonar contact at depths German doctrine considered safe, and the attack came from ahead, no longer from directly overhead, as it had for years before. In that instant, all the survival knowledge he trusted, dive deep, stay silent, wait for them to pass, became the very trap that doomed him. The world beneath the Atlantic had changed, only his old belief remained the same. The hedgehog projectiles arrived in seconds, not in the half-minute depth charges once required. When they struck, death was instant, no time for damage control, no chance of survival, no opportunity to surface and escape. This was the profound irony at the heart of the hedgehog story. German U-boat crews were not defeated by fear or incompetence, but because their tactical world had changed faster than they could understand. One impact, one heartbeat, and the line between belief and truth vanished beneath the sea. They did not lose for lack of courage or skill. They lost because the entire tactical framework, the system where their bravery and expertise once mattered, had been fundamentally rewritten by technological and doctrinal changes they could neither predict nor counter. The knowledge that had once kept them alive to exploit sonar blind spots, to maneuver at the perfect moment, to trust in the old rhythms of survival, had become a lethal illusion in this new age of undersea warfare. The very skills that once saved lives, maneuvering during descent, surviving through hull strength and evasive tactics, had become obsolete. What was once survival wisdom turned into a lethal misconception. This was not merely a tale of technological progress, but a tragedy of belief betrayed by truth. German submariners were not crushed by overwhelming material power, but by an invisible shift where everything they trusted, every tactic once right, suddenly meant nothing. They were not defeated for lack of courage, but because the battlefield had changed while their doctrine had not. The tactics that once saved them had become lethal traps. They kept practicing the old lessons in an operational world that no longer existed, unaware that the rules of war had changed until those new rules killed them. It is the timeless tragedy of warfare, when faith and experience collide with a harsher, newer truth. Throughout military history, one pattern repeats itself. Tactics that once guaranteed victory eventually become the trap that destroys those who still believe in them. Cavalry charges persisted into the age of machine guns because courage was mistaken for invincibility. Fortress cities once deemed impenetrable crumbled before modern artillery, and the mighty battleships that ruled the seas became relics the moment aircraft carriers proved that true power lies in striking from beyond the horizon. It's the brutal truth of warfare. Every great tactic has an expiration date, and those who refuse to evolve are left behind by history. In every war, when the tactical environment shifts, the doctrines that once saved lives can become deadly traps. The hedgehog mortar proved this truth, a simple, mechanical device with a strategic impact far greater than its design, because it struck directly at the core assumptions of German submarine evasion doctrine. What was once wisdom turned fatal when a single contact hit could erase an entire crew. By eliminating the sonar blind spot, compressing reaction time, and needing only a single contact hit to kill the hedgehog, erased every margin German tactical skill once exploited. A U-boat commander could execute flawless, evasive maneuvers according to doctrine, yet die within the very rules he believed would save him, because the battlefield had changed, but the doctrine had not. During World War II, over 28,000 German submariners lost their lives, most of them in the war's final 18 months, when anti-submarine systems like the hedgehog spread across the oceans. Yet this tragedy went far beyond the mere horror of dying in battle. They died not only to enemy fire, but because their leaders could not, or would not, accept that the tactical balance had shifted forever. These brave men fought and perished in faiths that no longer matched reality, caught in that fatal gap where belief lags behind truth. They died not from a lack of courage, but because the German Navy learned too slowly. Intelligence gathered facts too late, and training doctrine adapted too gradually to a battlefield, transforming every single day. Yet the submarines kept sailing, sent on missions whose strategic value had vanished, while the cost in lives grew unbearable. It was not just a tactical failure, but the tragedy of a system unable to stop, even when sacrifice had lost all meaning. The hedgehog's success rate, 1 kill for every 5 attacks, compared to 1 for every 60 depth charge runs, defined the mathematical face of a technological revolution in anti-submarine warfare. But numbers could never convey what submarine crews truly felt, hunted by a weapon they barely understood, one that shattered every tactical belief they had about survival beneath the sea. In the silence between detonations, they no longer fought with skill, but with a fragile hope that time had not yet run out. The bitterest moment in war isn't death itself, it's realizing that everything you once trusted to keep you alive no longer works. All the hard-won skills, the survival instincts suddenly mean nothing when truth collides with belief. On the morning of May 29, 1944, Captain Lieutenant Detlev Krakenhagen still believed that his skill and his crew's discipline could bring them safely home. Yet 4.5 minutes after USS Elmore's second Hedgehog salvo hit the water, U-549 was gone forever beneath the Atlantic. Between belief and truth lies only the sound of a final sonar ping. Between those two moments, from belief in safety to death in just 4.5 minutes, lies the meaning of this entire story. The gap between what we believe and what is true, measured in the lives of men who never lived to know the staid difference. Not because they lacked courage, but because the world changed faster than their beliefs could follow. Every lesson of history, every piece of technology, every new tactic reminds us of one simple truth: belief must evolve with understanding, or it sinks with time. Thank you for watching, and remember to subscribe for more stories where truth and belief collide in history.